I very much enjoyed your column in the Sunday Times yesterday, which was all about why people seem to be pushed around all the time. I found myself the other day coming out of the tube, and one of the exits was blocked by these kind of uniformed so-called London Underground employees who don't seem to do anything except stand around telling you which way to walk. And I was so incensed that they were telling me I couldn't go in a particular direction. I thought I finally reached peak madness, because I hate being told what to do. But everybody at the moment seems to want to tell us what to do.
They do, yeah. I mean, this comes from for the first time in a very long while, an intelligence statement from the government, which is... they've called it their bonfire of the banalities, and what they're trying to do is to stop rail companies, particularly, it comes from Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, stop them giving us fatuous information and fatuous instructions. And I think they particularly mean see it, say it, sorted.
Oh.
That hugely, so, you know, that thing when you see a rucksack with some sarin poking out of it on the train. You know, you're supposed to tell the train manager there's some sarin over there, mate, and he sorts it out for you.
Yeah, well, first, not before asking if you're wearing a mask, presumably.
Well, before kicking you off the train for not wearing a mask. Yeah, that's absolutely right. But it's what they could do is broaden this, because it's actually quite a serious subject, because what it does is undermine our own sense of responsibility for how we behave and how we interact with other people. If you keep being told, so for example, I'll give an example in the piece I wrote, which is if you go down to Bond Street Tube, you'll find somewhere in the region of 27, 28 instructions as to how to behave. All of them you would do anyway, unless you're a sociopath.
Right.
So it's buy a ticket. And they tell you that on the train, of course. You can't come on this train without a ticket. No? Really? Good Lord. You know, make sure you stand on the right. Don't push, don't rush, let people off the train first. We all do this because we're sentient human beings. And frankly, a sociopath won't take any notice of these rules anyway, of people telling you to do this. And what it does is and it's been proven, it makes life more dangerous, and it takes away our own sense of responsibility. And the way they've proven this is with street signs.
Yeah.
Particularly in Holland, started in the Netherlands with a Dutch engineer who said, well, what would happen if we removed all these hectoring street furniture signs, you know, telling you to slow down, behave yourself, get into lane,
keep left.
Keep left. Make sure you don't do any of this stuff. And so he removed them. They removed them from a whole bunch, and things got a lot better. There was a slowing of traffic speed because people suddenly had to think for themselves and look out for other people, and there was a immediate reduction in incidents of, you know, crashes and stuff like that. So it actually works. If you give people back their independence, it works. And there's a kind of corollary with COVID over this. I didn't mention it in my piece, but it's the kind of same thing, that instead of telling us we can't go out of our house at all, as in the first lockdown, you know, can only go to the shops once a fortnight, allowed out for an hour, but you can't sit down on a bench, all that stuff. If you actually leave it to people to decide to behave responsibly, the vast majority of them will. And I think that's what we've seen in the last 6 weeks with Omicron. People have used their own common sense, and as a consequence, we're emerging very rapidly from this illness.
Yes, and isn't it interesting how so many of the sort of former sage maniacs are now kind of coming around to the idea that perhaps that is the best way to go, but while qualifying it, because they don't want to make out they made some terrible mistakes, qualifying it by saying, well, of course, over the course of 2 years, people's behaviour has changed, and so people are behaving now in a way which is less likely to spread it. But I'm not sure that that's true. I think there are some people who like to be told what to do and others who don't.
I think that's probably true, and I think Sage is wrong, as it's been wrong for the last 6 months about pretty much everything. When we were in that first lockdown, which was, I mean, if you think back to it, Mike, it was incredibly rigorous. I mean, it's
very specific as well,
and very specific. It's hard now to believe that as we dosed ourselves up on hand sanitizer to go out for our bi-weekly our once weekly shop at the local supermarket, standing 10 yards away, queues all down. It's really difficult to understand that we put up with that, but we did. But when we came out of that lockdown, you remember our Freedom Day.
Yes.
Well, and I suspect most people, didn't rush around hugging everybody,
No.
breathing on them. We just behaved proportionately.
Right.
And once we're given the right to behave the way we think is best, then people tend to do it. There'll always be some nutters who don't, like Boris Johnson, for example.
Well, I mean, it doesn't make for great reading, does it, when you see that some of the people who have mostly been affected by COVID the worst and have been isolating the most, they're all in Westminster. I mean, Keir Starmer's been self-isolating 6 times up to now.
Yeah, and don't forget it started in Westminster, and that's one of the nastier things about this illness, which is that it began with the affluent in Westminster, but killed the elderly and the poor in the parts of the country I'm in, up here in Teesside.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. That being said, on the Boris Johnson issue, I don't think he's got long for this world.
No.
But it's interesting that we'll effectively be getting rid of him for the very reasons we liked him, which is propensity to break rules and take no notice of what people tell him to do.
Right.
And he broke rules continually over Brexit. If you remember, his attempts to get the Brexit bill through Parliament involved the most appalling chicanery, actually. But he did it, and we liked him for it because it was the democratic thing to do.
Right.
And he told the sage scientists before Christmas to get stuff, basically.
Well, thank goodness for that, because we haven't seen them since, And
we haven't seen them since.
One of them's leaving. I don't know where Chris Whitty's hiding, but he's not been seen since he told everybody to prioritise their social engagement sometime around about December the 20th.
No, that's right. And hopefully we don't hear from them too much again, and hopefully we don't. There was a rather naive idea round about March and April 2020 that we being guided by science was in some way a good thing, because science is objective and science doesn't bother with politics. And it was so naive and so dumb, because of course science is never as pure and as objective as you think it's going to be, and it's very often wrong. That's the point of science.
Right.
And they've been wrong, frequently and calamitously, I would say, in the last 8 weeks. And they don't tell the truth. That's the thing which bothers me.
Yeah.
Because I remember during the early days of Omicron, they were trying to deny that it was a mild illness.
Yes. Well, they were actively misleading us, I would say.
They were actively misleading us. And so at first they tried to tell us it wasn't a mild illness, when every available piece of information, either from South Africa or from Great Britain, with the handful of cases which had come in, showed that it was indeed a very mild illness.
Yeah.
And indeed, milder, actually, than a usual winter cold and cough. So they tried to do that, which was a lie. That was actually a lie. They also later said that, well, okay, maybe it's milder, a little bit milder. Well, it's not a bit milder, it's very mild. But that will be compensated for by the fact that it affects more people. So our hospitals will be overflowing. Well, again, no, that was a lie.
Yeah.
It wasn't merely inaccurate. They were putting out falsehoods.
But it's a bit like saying the area of the triangle remains the same because one side's got a lot longer, even though the other side's got a lot shorter. And you should have been saying, actually, that's not a triangle anymore.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's not just that. There are other little things which, gnaw away at me and annoy me. Because I can remember thinking back in 2020, and I'm no biological, epidemiological expert, but I do remember particularly from, actually, oddly enough, myxomatosis, that viruses tend to weaken and become more transmissible. So more people get them, but they're a lot weaker over time. And we were told continually by the sage lot that, oh no, that's a common falsehood, But once again now we're hearing scientists coming out and saying, well, it is the tendency of viruses like COVID to become weaker but more transmissible.
Yes. I also heard last week one of these doctors saying, well, of course, the reason we didn't pay any attention to the data from South Africa was because they have a very different situation from us, because they had many more people who had been infected with COVID and who therefore had immunity because they'd had it. And I'm like, hang on a minute. You've been telling us for ages that that doesn't matter and that it's more important to get a vaccination. Right. Suddenly they're now relying on that as a reason why they couldn't actually quote it.
Yes, it's very good. Well, they also pointed out that South Africa had a different age demographic to us. And it does, but it doesn't mean you discount the entire evidence. No. Because the entire evidence was saying this is a really, really mild illness. And, you know, we've, in my house up here, we've had, my daughter had COVID and was perfectly okay, a bit sniffy for 2 or 3 days, you know. My wife had a normal cold and she was laid out for 2 or 3 days. I mean, it's become ludicrous. And it's become patently ludicrous because it's very clear to everybody now that all the other ailments, the winter flus, the colds, the coughs, are probably worse than this thing we have closed the entire country down to save ourselves from.
Yes. And so let's get back to Boris. He's being told this is another crucial week for him. It's very difficult now to read the runes on this, isn't it? I mean, I think he is, as you say, not long for this world. It's a question of when rather than if. But I suppose for those who want to see him staying in, they say, well, so what if he had a few parties? Like you said, that's what we expected him to do, in a way. But I say that his damage is not so much from the parties, it's from the fact that he hasn't done the things that he said he would do. You know, the only thing he's been focusing on is this green agenda. Now we've got this god-awful, you know, Chris Boardman-inspired race to the bike shed so that you must cycle and walk everywhere, which is fine if you live in the middle of London, but I suspect not great if you live in the Teesside area where there's probably one bus an hour to get you to the shops, you know?
Well, indeed. But no, I think that's true. I mean, what has he done? Up here we've got a free port, which is going to bring in 20,000 jobs. We're pleased about that. You know, that works. That's something. You know, that's part of the levelling up. But by and large, the levelling up really hasn't gone. I mean, it's only now they're getting around to thinking about a white paper on levelling up. You know, and that should have been done 2 years ago, and they haven't done it. I think it's more the lying than the parties, because people have finally twigged that Boris Johnson seems to lie reflexively.
Yes.
That it's his first port of call when anything happens is to lie.
Right.
You know, usually politicians save it for a bit later.
Right.
He does it straight down there, lie.
Yes.
And he thinks it doesn't matter. But I also think that mixed in there somewhere, everybody I talk to up here, everybody, you know, when I'm wandering around the shops, talking to a woman on the till at Marks and Spencer's, for example, she said, that her first grandson was born during the first lockdown. And he only lived a street away, but she couldn't visit him. All she was allowed to do was walk down the street and wave through the window.
That's crazy.
And so she's furious about the party. But it's difficult to say this, but I do wonder I think they're furious with Boris, but I think they're also furious with themselves. They haven't taken any notice.
Yes.
They haven't done all this in 2020. Why on earth did we do that? It seems to be.
Yeah, and there are an awful lot of people with that sort of experience, you know, who couldn't see a relative, or who had to cancel a wedding, or who have a business that's now ruined. You know, there's an awful lot of people in that situation. I think you're right, but also his failure to
including me. I couldn't see my relatives for ages, and I've never been happier in my life. But that's another issue, really.
Yeah, but what do you make of the kind of the chicanery that goes on inside the Tory Party? Because they've got a great history of knifing each other in the back whenever they get the opportunity to do so. But they seem a bit frightened of Boris.
I don't think they're very good at it. I think it's a myth that the Conservative Party is this ruthless organisation which reacts with great decisiveness. It really doesn't. I think they're scared stiff of a number of things at the moment. Firstly, it's almost always the case that the front runner in any Conservative Party leadership race doesn't win. It's almost always the case, right back to Margaret Thatcher. and indeed Edward Heath, but Margaret Thatcher particularly came from the outside. John Major came from the outside. Theresa May came from the outside, etc., etc. None of them were favourites. So that puts an enormous pressure on people like Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, but particularly Rishi, I suppose. So what they're trying to do at the moment is work out who will be jockeying for position, who could possibly be the leader, and it's not terribly clear at the moment. I think he's a goner, Boris, but I think it could be 2 or 3 months. You know, I think the May elections may prove more crucial for the Conservative Party than Sue Gray's letter or investigation. I mean, the relationship between Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party is transactional. He is there because loads of MPs, many of whom cannot stand him, he wins elections.
Yeah.
For some reason, he's popular with the people. But now that's in the past tense. You know, you look at his opinion poll ratings. Once that's gone, there is no point in keeping Boris Johnson.
I think that's right. And when he is finally sort of shuffled out, as they all are inevitably against their will, will it be, do you think, the fault of his associations with the wrong kind of people, like sort of Carrie and her friends and the people who have been advising him over the course of time, who are clearly incredibly metropolitan elite types, you know, people like, you know, the Zach Goldsmiths of this world and the various other kind of Eton-educated, privately educated kids who are in Downing Street, who have no real clue about how people live in places like where you are?
No, and I think that's exactly right. I mean, he got rid of the wrong person, didn't he? I mean, Dominic Cummings would have been very, very useful.
Yeah.
But Dominic's not a Conservative. You know, he's probably a bit more like me, a Social Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're dead right about Carrie and the influence. I mean, I don't know how deep that influence is, but it is nonetheless the case that the Conservative Party has been very slow to kick back against the kind of liberal overreach and wokery rubbish that we've all had to put up with these last 5 or 6 years. Indeed, there are still Conservative MPs, you know, on important committees such as the ghastly Caroline Noakes, who are, you know, urging us to be still more latitudinous towards the transgender lobby. You know, up yours, love. I'm not. But you know, it's been a Conservative government which is doing this. It's a Conservative government which is making these ludicrous suggestions for the transport network. You know, and yet this is exactly the sort of thing that the Red Wall voters didn't want.
No,
exactly. And they may want it in Fulham. You know, and I dare say that that the Labour Party will win Fulham and win all those other affluent places down south. But no one up here wanted it.
Well, that's right. I mean, I got a great tweet from this guy called Glenn this morning. He says, I'd love to work from home, but unfortunately I can't fit my lorry into my living room. And basically that kind of sums it all up, doesn't it? Yeah,
I know it absolutely does. Well, the other big story in all of this is the behaviour of the public sector.
Yes.
And particularly the top levels of the public sector, who have been the most strident in calling for more restrictions at every single turn. And are still calling for more restrictions now. And don't forget, it wasn't just Boris; it was the civil service which held that party.
Yeah,
you know, and I think they do think that the rules don't apply to them. And don't forget as well that the public sector, the divide between in pay, in pensions, in working hours, in working years between the public sector and the private sector is growing by the week. The public sector have had a really, really good COVID.
Oh, they have, without any question.
Very well.